These are very interesting questions, and as usual, they would require a lecture each. So I'm not going to do them in the order that they came. I'm going to try and reorder them slightly. How could we do physics at all if the universe is not causally closed? I would suspect that we wouldn't know anything at all, or be able even to reason if the universe were causally closed. Now, this is an argument that C.S. Lewis has developed very powerfully. You see, the thing that I left out of my account because I ran out of time was this. One of the biggest problems these days relates to what I said at the very beginning. All scientists believe that we can do science, and you've referred to it, we can do physics. What do we do it with? Well, we do it with our mind. But what is the mind? Well, it's the brain, according to the reductionist. And what is the brain? It's the end product of a mindless, unguided process. Now, I would put to you that if you go into your lab at Georgia Tech tomorrow, and you're introduced to a new piece of equipment by your professor who says, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very interesting new piece of test equipment. It was constructed by a mindless, unguided process. And I want you to use it for your final examinations. I think you'd object. You wouldn't trust it. And you see, from where I sit as a Christian, I have a rationale for trusting my intelligence, because there's a God behind the universe that the mind is studying and behind the mind. Now, this is an argument that is now being taken up very powerfully by one of the leading philosophers in this country called Thomas Nagel. And Thomas Nagel has written a book called Mind and Cosmos. And his fellow atheists are massively upset. If you want to see how upset they are, just Google his name. Because Nagel is arguing that if you take this closed universe reductionist view, you end up by undermining rationality. As Alvin Plantinga, one of America's leading philosophers, a Christian this time, points out, if Dawkins is right, that our minds are essentially our brains and are cobbled together by mindless, unguided processes, then he has given us strong reason to doubt anything they tell us, including his science and his atheism. And my biggest problem here is this. My main objection to atheism, I'll be honest with you, is not because I'm a Christian, it's because I'm a scientist. It undermines the very rationality I need to do science. And ironically, it's the fact that the universe is open and there is a creator gives the rationale behind that. Now, this is a Q&A. I can only approximate to answers. Your question is brilliant. It deserves a whole lecture, but that's all I can say, because there are other things that we need to be able to do. The fear of death, what evidence do we have of atheist fear? Max Horkheimer was a brilliant thinker. And he says, you know, I fear that there might not be a God. And I fear it because if there's no God, then there'd be no ultimate justice. Thomas Nagel says, I don't want there to be a God. And other people have said, like Thomas Huxley, the relief that came when he discovered that there was no God and therefore there was no judgment to be faced after death. I mean, I can't quote them all out of my head, but there are dozens of people. The fear of death is an immense driving power, not only for Christians, but for atheists. But the difference between the two, of course, is Christianity has an answer to death. It's the resurrection of Jesus, where atheism has, by definition, no answer whatsoever. So I think you can see with many atheists, very honest, they are afraid of death. They're afraid of non-being because they want to have some ultimate significance. Now, can we reduce meaning? Now, what I've written down here, I can no longer read. Can we reduce meaning to speech acts? Was that the question? Well, half a minute. I could interpret that in a marvelous way, I think, that would suit my purposes very well. And that would be that when you read the description of creation at the beginning of the Bible, it goes like this: and God said, let there be light. and God said, and God said. In fact, according to the Bible, it is a speech act, but it's more than a speech act. If I say, let there be light, nothing will happen unless somebody's working a switch at the back of the room. I can't create light. The amazing thing is about God's speech acts is that they have creative energy and power. And I think you're hitting on something very important there, because the Bible says relatively little about the how of creation, but what it does emphasize is this concept of speaking, of the Word. In the beginning was the Word, all things were made by him. So that speech, word, logic, information, command is primary, and the mass energy is secondary. So there is a very real sense in which I think you are running parallel to what is actually being claimed. Except there's a vast difference between God's speech act and my speech act. He is God the creator, and his speech has got creatorial power. Now, if God is eternal, then things that are not created exist. So we don't know whether the universe is created or not, but that is not the common view of any physicist I meet. The convergent view of physicists is the standard model. And you may well know that I mentioned Alan Guth, but there are three. There's a trio of them, Bohr and Vilenkin. And they have proved what are called the Guth-Bohr-Vilenkin theorems, not surprisingly. And the argument is that even if you've got a multiverse, the universe is past finite in time, and these theorems demand it. And in fact, Alex Vilenkin puts in his paper that cosmologists can no longer hide behind the idea of an eternal universe. So I'm only going on the basis of the science. Your argument seems to be to not affect the science that we're approaching. Simply by saying that God is eternal and he exists means that we can immediately think the universe is eternal. But half a minute, I thought we were scientists here, and we were going on the basis of the science as to what we thought the universe was. Okay, now, language infers intelligence, yes. Before Darwin, nature implied intelligence. And afterwards, nature doesn't imply intelligence. Half a minute. Half a minute. Darwin dealt with life, the biosphere. The physicists have done phenomenal work in cosmologists on what's called the fine-tuning of the universe. And I'm sure all of us in this room are aware that whatever you think of evolution or not, you need a fine-tuned universe to get the carbon on which life depends. And it's very important to realize that the fine-tuning argument is totally independent of any arguments about evolution. So I would say, no, after Darwin, there are many scientists, including the two Nobel Prize winners I mentioned, who infer a designing intelligence from nature, because they're thinking, first of all, of the laws of nature. Where did they come from? That this is a law-like universe. Secondly, they're thinking of the fact that there was a creation. Thirdly, they're thinking of the fine-tuning. All of that long before you get to Darwin. So I simply think that your premise is incorrect. As to worshipping a sandwich, I think that's a very silly question, if you don't mind me being honest about it. I thought we were in Georgia Tech, where you decide things on the basis of evidence. And it's like God and Santa Claus. There's no competition between God and the sandwich. Because, ladies and gentlemen, you see, I can adduce from science, as I've tried to, some of the evidence why I believe in a creator, but it's not the only evidence. Looking at nature, and I'm an amateur astronomer, I love looking at Andromeda and all this kind of thing, and the sheer beauty of it overwhelms me with the majesty of God, but you only get so far looking at nature that way. There are other things, because you see, if I had read a little more or quoted a little bit more beyond where I went earlier, in the beginning was the Word, I would come down to a stunning statement, and the Word became human and dwelt among us. Now that's coming down to the specifics of Christianity. I don't simply believe that you can trace the fingerprints of God in the physical universe and in its low likeness. I believe that God has revealed himself in Jesus Christ by coming into this world. So that opens up the possibility of having a relationship with God. And my evidence that God is not a sandwich comes mainly from there. And I don't know of any scientist in his or her right mind who would think that the universe is produced by a sandwich. That's just simply frivolous thinking, to be honest.